So in America and the West in general, there seems to be a competition between multiple sides of the political spectrum who are trying to position themselves as the toughest on China, mainly blame them for the virus. But there's also been people like Donald Trump who've called it the ChinaVirus, and lots of people have parroted his language, thinking that it's okay to racialize a virus. And of course, what actually happens, even though it is saying China, what happens is to broad attacks and discrimination against Asians in general, who of course can't differentiate between different parts of Asia. Now, what has been disappointing is seeing people on the centre and the left also playing into this. So Joe Biden recently put an ad about how Donald Trump wasn't tough on China, and it really plays into a lot of xenophobia about Chinese people coming to America. So that was pretty awful. But someone who describes himself as a progressive, and you've probably seen him on Twitter, you've seen the news clips where he has done a lot of good work, he's taken down a lot of prominent people in interviews, is a guy called Medhi Hassan. Now lately he's been getting a lot of criticism because he keeps shaming people who won't vote for Joe Biden, and I've made a video about, you know, why it's okay not to vote for Joe Biden and all that good stuff, so you can go check that out. But recently he's also been talking about what we should call the virus. So I'm going to get into a tweet he put out the other day. So his initial tweet was, "If any government deserves criticism, it's China's. It lied and covered up the spread of the virus, arrested doctors who spoke out, and it also keeps millions of Uyghurs in concentration camps. ChinaVirus is xenophobic BS. Criticising the Xi dictatorship is necessary and welcome." So I thought ChinaVirus was racist BS, but it seems like he doesn't actually think that. So, by the way, if you're intent on calling the virus a name linked to who's behind it, call it the Xi virus. I dare Trump to call it that, but he won't, because he's a coward, and because Xi, as he keeps telling us, is his good friend. Now, so this is so wrong in multiple instances, but I'm going to get to the racialization part of it. No, I don't think you should call the virus the name of the leader of China, because just like calling it the China virus, it makes it seem like they've done it on purpose. It puts blame on the Chinese government like they've invented this virus. It also helps racialize it because it directly connects the virus just with Chinese people, including Xi himself, when in reality, even though it started in China, much more people have been infected in different countries. The US has way more cases of coronavirus. So why are we going to call it the Xi virus? Now let's get into the other part of the tweet I have problems with. How is the Xi government responsible for the coronavirus? So there's been a lot of general racism against Asians around wet markets. Yes, wet markets in China are bad in the fact that they have multiple exotic animals that don't exist together in a normal habitat, and they're all alive. So they're all spreading diseases between them, and this is how they speculate the virus initially developed. It was a mixture of different animals, and a lot of these animals are very good at spreading diseases. I think ferrets are a big one, but of course, you know, the pangolin, they're talking about people eating that and everything. That's obviously bad. But the whole notion that we don't have wet markets in the West is pretty crazy. Farmers markets, you can buy a lot of animals from different people. So it's kind of crazy we're so focused on China having a wet market, you know, close down the wet markets and all this stuff you see on Twitter and Reddit. But obviously you've got to analyse why people use these wet markets in the first place. Because do you think if Chinese people had the choice of, you know, here is some nice cut up bits of chicken, bits of beef, all these chicken have been fed antibiotics, so you know they're not ill, you know they had nothing bad in them, so they are good to eat. So if Chinese people were offered that, and then you said, here is a bunch of wolves, pangolin, bats, loads of other weird animals, would you rather have them where they're alive and someone butchers them in front of you, and you can see they've been in dirty conditions? So again, China isn't responsible for this in terms of creating it. It's just a symptom of poverty a lot of the times. China is a massive, massive country. It's been poor for hundreds of years. It's getting more wealthy now, but there's still a lot of economic inequality there. So people rely on wet markets for their food. Now, obviously, there needs to be measures to stop, you know, the sale of exotic animals, but a lot of the time they just eat what they can get. It's the same in places in Africa that are so poor that they rely on bushmeat, which is various different types of animals they kill in these countries, like in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And of course, HIV was a mutation of a virus that chimpanzees had. Ebola came from bats. But again, like I'm saying, these people don't eat these animals because they just like how it tastes, or they have a big supermarket full of different options. They eat it because they don't have any choice of any other meat or any other types of food sometimes. It's how they, sustain themselves. So I don't like the thought that we're blaming Xi Jinping for wet markets as well, even though it needs to be more done. It's obviously a symptom of poverty. Now, like Medhi was saying, there are obviously massive problems with the Chinese government. Like he's talking about the Uyghurs, and if you read a lot of the reports coming out about that, it's deeply, deeply disturbing. But again, we can criticize Xi Jinping for that, but we don't need to criticize him for the actual virus. I'm not talking about the response, I'm talking about the actual virus. It's not his fault it exists. It's not his fault it spread, essentially, because the whole world treated this really badly. China locked down a lot harsher than the rest of the world. Its lockdown and quarantine measures were literally some of the harshest. So they obviously did, when they saw they couldn't contain it properly, they obviously did take proper measures to contain the virus. So you shouldn't be calling the virus the Xi virus because, first of all, it makes no sense to blame this one guy for a natural outbreak, even though it was facilitated by these wet markets. And again, you can't blame the Chinese people for using these wet markets because it's not because they just have a lot of bountiful choice from really clean antibiotic chicken and cows that they can eat. They just, again, in poor countries, you eat what you can get. Now, of course, you can criticize the Chinese cover-up of a lot of these things where they haven't been willing to share a lot of numbers of cases or deaths, where obviously, it's well documented now, when doctors initially said this could be a bad coronavirus, they were threatened by the Chinese government and local authorities. Of course, the Communist Party in Beijing said it was actually the fault of the local government and they fired a lot of people. Whether that's true is we don't know. It could be, but it's just too up in the air to blame one guy. You can hate Xi Jinping, you can hate the Chinese Communist Party, you can criticize them for their response to the virus, you can criticize them for their general actions in China. Again, if you're against racializing a virus that leads to discrimination, maybe don't link it just with one Chinese guy who is the representative of 1+ billion people, because do you think that is any different from calling it the China virus? It's pretty much exactly the same, and it's going to have the same effect. So it's crazy to me, some guy who obviously has talked about being discriminated against for being a Muslim, being treated unfairly, is somehow thinking an evolved form of China virus to Xi virus is a good idea for Donald Trump to spread to all of America. I don't know what's happened to this guy. He clearly is very smart, and I have seen him do some great work, but his takes on Joe Biden and the coronavirus have been really, really warped. And he speaks up about Muslim rights and discrimination a lot. So I get that the Uyghur Muslim might be even more emotive than it is for a lot of people, because they're literally directly discriminating against a religion that he's part of. They're trying to erase the religion from these people's lives. So I get that, and I get his hatred for Xi Jinping, but you think he'd be smart enough to have some introspection and say, well, I don't like the guy, but he's obviously not responsible for the virus, and me using a Chinese leader as instead of the virus's name will probably have some negative side effects into how people treat Asians in Western countries. Probably will help them continue to blame all Asians for the virus. So again, if you're a so-called progressive, don't racialize the coronavirus. It can literally happen anywhere in the world, and a lot of the times it happens in these countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, like China, not because they just love eating rare food. It's because they literally don't have many options and they just eat what they can get. And of course, in poor places, sanitary conditions and cleanliness is not a priority because they don't have that luxury. The goal is to lift people out of poverty, and I think a broader point about the coronavirus is we should just stop eating meat altogether. And I've been talking about antibiotics in chicken. What that does is help viruses learn how to combat antibiotics. So if you keep, the meat trade up and you keep giving chickens and cows antibiotics that we ourselves use, the virus will learn how to get around that, and that's how you create another deadly pandemic. So just something to think about of how we as a society completely should transition off meat, but that also goes hand in hand with raising people out of poverty so they actually have a choice about what they eat and they have access to clean and sanitary food created in sanitary conditions. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like the video, maybe subscribe, follow me at social media at The Cavernacle on Twitter, that is the main one, but also Facebook and Instagram. Check out my subreddit, and that is r/The Cavernacle. Check out my personal Reddit, which is u/TommyCahill1995. My WordPress and my Patreon are in the description, and thanks to all my patrons, I really appreciate your support. I've also written an article on Medium, which has got some good feedback, and that is on my community tab, my most recent post. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.